Hello, and my name is Joseph Pizzula. I'm an attorney out of Philadelphia. I practice with the law firm of Pizzula Rodin. Tonight, the course is the fundamentals of starting a business. When I speak over the next couple hours, it's also going the same rules, the same application applies to purchasing a business. So I'm going to be using that. I'm going to be using a lot tonight, whether it's starting a business or purchasing a business. When I haven't tried cases, many cases over the last 35 years, I usually start with the negative. No one is going to leave this room and be an expert at starting a business. What I want to accomplish over the next 3 hours is that I want each and every one of you to be able to walk into a room, talk to a client, understand what's going on. I have an accounting degree, and I'm able to sit in any room and understand what's being spoken about. And if something's wrong, I always have a gut reaction. So if I can accomplish anything tonight, what I want to accomplish is that you'll be able to understand the concepts. Each and every one of you have an outline. Refer to that outline when you leave here if there's any issues. If anyone has any questions, just raise your hand and stop me. If anyone online has any questions, just email them in and someone will hand them to me and I'll answer them, because I'm here to help you. My son has 5 degrees. He has a math degree, a Wharton degree, an MBA, a JD, an LOM. He'll be going into the technical side. When I have an issue, I usually grab him or someone else in the office. But as the lead attorney in the office, I've seen everything. I've handled companies that do $1 billion. I've handled companies that do 100,000. The issues are identical. And the same issues come in day out. The immigration attorneys, the IT attorneys, why you want to get in this area, you don't have to look for clients. If you have a client that does $500 million, they're calling you up every day of the week. You don't have to advertise. You do not have to put a billboard. You don't have and buy ads in magazines. You have clients. In our practice right now, we've lost probably 6, 7 clients over the last 5 years, mainly from international companies coming into the United States and buying them. And it's nice to see a client. And you cannot be jealous. And I'm going to go into the ethical side in a few minutes. It's nice to see a client when you do 100% financing. And 10 years later, they're bought out for $100 million. And you see a client walk away with $100 million. Twice this week, I'm jumping ahead. And I drive David crazy because I don't follow the outline. But twice this week, I had letters of intent at my desk. And both clients, I said, no way. I said, you're not leaving with enough money that you're set up for life. In today's economy, especially with the financing being what it is, it's tough to get financing. And you have a lot of people on you. A lot of clients are becoming very frustrated today. And they're trying to get out. But if you're going to get out with $1 million or $2 million, it's not going to set you up for life. And my job is to never get jealous. I've had at least 10 clients over the last 5 years walk away with anywhere from $20 million to $200 million cash. And I cannot ask for part of that. I can't be jealous. I have to be happy. But that's our job when they're starting a business. Our job is long term. So I'm going to step back a little bit. What is the role of the attorney or the CPA? And how I'm going to address that is, let's talk about a business degree. How many sciences go into starting a business or purchasing a business? If you have a client that walks in your office, what are some of the business degrees that you have to cover? That's the reason it's very difficult. And I get referred in a lot by, I'm Italian, and there's a lot of Italian attorneys in Philadelphia who do criminal law and PI law. The only one that's besides my son and myself, we don't have much competition in the Italian community. And I'm always referred in by these attorneys after they make a major mistake, because they don't have a business degree. And they try to control the client. So if you want to look at the role, what are some of the business majors that you have to have some knowledge of? You're not an expert. To counsel a client in starting a business or purchasing a business. That's one of the degrees. And that's the CPA. Who else? What are some of the monies that your father spends? You said you own a trucking business. What are some of the business majors that you have to have a background in?
I'd say psychology.
You have to have psychology. That's probably the most important today. And that's not even in the business school. That's what most business majors took in the summer to get rid of it. So many other majors.
Finance.
Finance? Why?
Have to be able to raise capital for the business, have to understand the financial statements and general finances of business.
And is it possible for a client to do 95% financing? And we're going to get into that later on. I've done it. You may not get it with a local bank, but with private investors or New York insurance companies, you can find it. What else do you need? Insurance. Can you start a business without insurance?
No way.
And how many insurance? How many kinds of insurance do you need?
At least 2 at minimum.
You need workman comp.
Liability, workers' comp.
What else? Liability, health, life.
D&O,
Pardon me?
D&O, directors and officers.
Yes. Anything else? Any other business degrees? Courses you took inside the business school?
Taxation.
Accounting, taxation, and banking. You need to know banking. The point I'm trying to make is, who in this room knows half of this stuff?
Half of it. I know half of it.
Do you know half? Not many people do. And the role of the attorney is not to be in charge. None of us know all this. If you do, you're going to commit malpractice. I don't know insurance. I can follow it. We just had a business client come in and say he's ready to buy $1 million annuity. $1 million up front, cash. And I said to him, let me give it to Jeffrey and do an actual study on it. I'm clueless on it. I understand it, I follow it, but I don't have the background to do the numbers. Do I know marketing? How can you buy a business or start a business without knowing marketing? They're coming to you for counseling. You want to worry about banking. How many clients just walk into the bank and say, I want to borrow $1 million? Those days are done. Banks are lending money. But you better make it, what I tell people, it's funny because my son has been going basketball games with me for many, many years. In Philadelphia, we have the Big Five basketball. And we have quite a few Catholic universities. And I joke about it because I came out of Temple. I said you can always tell where they went to. Dress down day, they take their tie off and they open their collar up. But they're very parochial. They work for banks. They do not think out of the box. On the train up here today, I have a client who's thinking about buying out his co-shareholder. And I know the person. I said, you better lay it out like he's a 3-year-old. He does not think out of the box. You better show him the offer that's on the table, what your offer, and why he should accept your offer, why it is better. But lay it out. And I tell clients, when you go through this, you talk about psychology, it's like going in front of a judge. You better know everything about the judge before you walk in the room. If you do not, you're going to lose. But when you're starting a business, I try to work for a team. You're not going to get a major business client off the internet. He's not going to find your website and call you up and say, represent my business, I'm doing $50 million, I need a business attorney. You're not going to get him because you went to college with him. Most of your good clients come in through referrals. So I do have a network of insurance people. I do have a network of bankers. I do have a network of CPAs. I don't care what people say, it's old school. You get business clients from referrals. I can close 98% of the people who walk in my office, but I have to get them to walk in. They're not going to walk in because of my website. They're not going to walk in because they see me on TV or radio. Most ones you get they're not worth it. They're not worth it. But if I get referred in by a banker, if I get referred in by a CPA, if I get referred in by a life underwriter, I can close the client immediately. But the point I'm trying to make is, what is our role? The CPAs? It's the accounting. Get the federal ID number. My role is to set up what type of business organization. My role is to set up the agreements. My role is to do the formation document. The banker, I have to work with the CPA to do a pro forma. And I'll get into that in a few minutes. That's the accountant's role. If we're going to borrow money, I need numbers. I need a booklet. I need a pro forma. I need a background on the clients. Many years ago, I had a client buy a business for $3.2 million. We borrowed $3.1 million. The only reason the client was able to borrow that money, he bought a business, the same management team was buying the business. We showed New York Life the same people ran this company for 10 years, and it's going to be continuity. There's no change. He borrowed at 5 above prime. What was prime in 1980? You're old enough. What was the highest prime ever went up to?
12?
No, come on.
Higher,
18, 16?
How old are you? How old are you?
about 19.
20. Went up to 20. And he was paying 25% interest. But he made it. He made it over the cycle. We proved to the bank through the numbers, and the business is sold, and I won't even get into how much he sold it for. But you can do it. Psychology, know where your client's headed. The two clients I said, the LOI this week that I vetoed, I said to the client, when was the last time you worked for somebody? Neither of them ever did. The one client I said, I'll make up his name, James. I said, how long you think it's going to last? You're going to last with the new owner? 2 weeks, 2 months? You won't last 3 years. I know you. And the other client I said, you got the business from your dad got the business from his grandfather, and you want to leave it to your son. You cannot sell out because you have differences with your co-shareholder. I said, think it through. And you're not getting enough money to walk away and never work again. But you have to understand the client. Marketing, any questions on this? What do you think your role is?
What do you think my role is?
Mm-hmm.
I'm usually the organizer between my finance department and between my executive team. And I'm usually reviewing the term sheets and advising.
What was your college major?
My college major?
Yeah.
Social sciences.
Okay. Who was the accounting? Anyone in here accounting who went to law school? I mean, what we have that separates us is our analytical ability. I'm able to analyze anything, but I look at it in an abstract way with emotions aside. But you have to tune in to your clients and know where they're headed. Certain clients, they're just buying. They're expanding. And I truly understand in all this, we're not their friends. We are paid to perform. They're not paying us hundreds of dollars an hour to be their friend. They want you to understand them. With BlackBerries or smartphones being what they are, they want to be able to reach at all times. And they want you to talk up to them. I mean, there's many clients I will say, Ed, I know you. And I've never seen a client leave me because I'm abrupt. I can be very abrupt. But they want to hear it. I'm not the right-hand person that has to be with them every day. And they want you to fight for them. They may argue with you at times, but I've never lost a client because of that. For the attorneys in here, we have a client come in, or clients. Who do we represent? We have John and Ed. They're starting XYZ. Who do we represent? Start from the beginning.
It's not clear. You better get some clarity whether you're representing the entity, whether you're representing one or the other, whether you're representing them mutually, because if there's litigation down the road, that's going to be an important question.
Do you draft a lot of shareholders agreements?
No, but I litigate them.
Against the attorneys. You're going to have 20 attorneys here. Don't point it. No, it's so true. Who do we owe our loyalty to? John and Ed walk in. They're saying they want to set up a business entity to purchase this electrical company. And I'm going to set up the corporation or set up the LLC or set up the partnership. Who do I owe my loyalty to? Ethics 1. I mean, I'm sure you took ethics in New York. What do you think?
You're asking me, an IP lawyer.
Okay, someone comes
We're
in.
gonna have the same
Wait,
thing.
I'm coming in. I got this great idea. I want to set up this. I want to buy this, purchase this patent, and you're going to process it for me. And it's XYZ Inc. Who do you owe your loyalty to?
It's XYZ Inc. If XYZ Inc. is going to hold the patent.
What do you think? Told you I want to pick on you.
You can pick on me. It's a very... If XYZ Inc. is existing, you're representing XYZ Inc. If you're forming the company on behalf of John and Ed, it goes back to John and Ed are your clients, and you're going to help them form their company.
How can you?
How can you help them?
Okay, I'll make it more confused. John is his name. I just did this. Set up a company. He's putting in $1 million. But Ed has the brains. And he needs his IT advice. John went to community college. Ed went to MIT. And they want to set up this company to form this company that's going to hold patents in the medical field. And they both come in. They both heard about me from Citibank. And they come into my office together. Who do I owe my loyalty to?
You owe it to both of them. And
You can't.
well, you can. What you have to do is explain to them that there will be issues with its adversity between the two of them, and you can't give advice to one or the other unless they consent to it. Unless they consent that your loyalty will be to one or the other. So you can form a shareholders agreement in a very neutral fashion, explain to them where the issues are, and advise them that they seek independent counsel on those issues.
Jeffrey just drafted one for a company. They're buying a bus company farm, or where the load buses. And there are four members. And it's going out tomorrow morning. I disagree with you a little bit. I believe my loyalty is to the entity. But in the practice of law, neither you, even though you litigated, you're not going to tell John and Ed to leave and go get independent counsel. It's impossible. But we all know, especially someone with your experience or my experience, where that gray area arises. And we know where we're telling John, I mean, some people, and it goes back to the psychology or philosophy. You put $1 million, you're owning 51%. But John says, I don't care. I need his knowledge. And his knowledge is invaluable. So am I telling them 51 or 60? There are some people, especially a lot of CPAs, will say to you, the money counts. You can always buy talent. You can always buy a singer. You can always buy a comedian. But the loyalty always goes to XYZ. For those of you on the web tonight or in here, I have conflict language I put inside every agreement. The one today, it's in a whole page and it's bold. It's triple size. and I clearly say, I'm drafting what you tell me to draft, and I'm a scrivener, and neither Pizzula Rodin, Joe Pizzula, Jeffrey Pizzullo, or anyone else associated with this firm represents the individual members, the shareholders, partners, and you all have the opportunity to get independent counsel. It never happens unless we get into a fight over the million versus Sweat. Give you another example. What if they tell me, and this has happened, I want you to serve as a director, Joe. We want you to be the swing vote or inside the room to give us counsel. And will you serve? Is that prohibited under the Code of Ethics? What do you think?
Yes, because then you can't fulfill you're kind of biased then towards what happens in the company.
I'm a director.
Yeah, but then you're not looking at it.
What if John asked me to serve because I went to college with John? Then I have a problem. But is it prohibited under the Code of Ethics? Whether New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, or the ABA model rules? Is there a strict prohibition? Does anyone know in the room?
Well, if there is, then I know attorneys who violate it regularly.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
They are directors and they also do legal work for these.
That's the reason you do it. You get paid as a director, you do the minutes, and every meeting, a lot of work flows out of there. Where are the ethical problems? Where do the ethical problems arise? And where can it backfire on me by being paid as a director?
Attorney-client privilege.
Absolutely. You got it. You must have read the book. No, that's where it comes in at. If I'm in the room, I'm not serving as an attorney. So the attorney-client privilege is waived. I'm serving there as, okay, let's get back a little bit. What's the role of a director? In a corporation, you have shareholders who elect the directors, who elect the officers. The officers run the company day to day. What's the role or the function or the responsibility of a director of a company?
Major decisions.
They manage the company. Not the day-to-day, they manage the company. So if you step back and you say, why is the attorney-client waived? Because you're managing a company. And where is it going to cost me money in my pocket by being a director? What would the indirect?
You're not going to get the legal work.
Why? Explain that.
Well, the attorney for the board theoretically would have, well, not theoretically, would have an attorney-client relationship. So you might want to give confidential information and advice to the board that you don't want shareholders to have access to. So if you're a director, you can be deposed. Anything that happened in the board.
You're going to be deposed. You're exactly right. You're going to be deposed, and any judge is going to conflict you out. And a lot of attorneys don't think that through. I'm going to confuse you a little bit further, or I'm going to play with you a little further. What if John say to me, it's going to cost $50,000 to set this up? And this happens. I'm dealing with one right now. We'll give you a 5% ownership of the company. Instead, would you take it? It's worth 5% $1 million, $50,000. Will you take it? Is that against the Code of Ethics? Whether it's New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, or the ABA?
I don't think it's strictly prohibited, but I think it's frowned upon in the rules. They tell you have to make full disclosure.
Where would the problem arise?
Well, down the road, your 5% is now worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They say, you coerced me into this, you gave me bad advice, your legal services were only worth $10,000.
Okay, let's step back one step. If I got 5%, What effects does that, how does that affect me immediately? And most attorneys don't think about it. You got all the answers right so far. So I'm going to hit you until you're
You've got
wrong.
tax implications.
Yeah, exactly. She came up with me on the train and read my outline. No, it's true. Most attorneys don't think that. It's income taxable. Most attorneys will take the ownership and forget about that it's taxable to him or her.
Yeah, but so is your income. He paid you $50,000 instead, that's taxable.
You're exactly right, but they don't think about taking an ownership because it's not a check that went into their checking account. They assume it's income in the future. They look at it as deferred compensation.
And it's also not always clear what the value is and whether or not it should be decreased because it's a de minimis amount compared to the whole, and you can't.
And you think an attorney's going to pay to have a valuation done? I don't know many. Secondly, the biggest issue is you lose your independence. In 38 years, I've never took an ownership. I've seen a lot of accountants, CPAs take ownership, and it always has a conflict down the line. Whether, not as what you said, as much as I lose my independence. Like if I saw that LOI today, and I saw myself making $100,000, sell. Why should I continue the ride with you for another 30 years? There's no reason for me to continue the ride with you. So many times I have always avoided. It's a conflict. It's not a violation of the rule of ethics. It is not. The violation will come, you lose your independence. And it could lead to a problem down the line. Let's take it one step further. I deal with a lot of banks in the city. Say I'm with a large firm. Someone comes in, they're putting $1 million in. They need another $1 million. I call up Scott over at Citibank. My firm done a lot of legal work for Citibank. Can I represent them in the loan? Do I have a conflict? Happens all the time. I have a lot of ins with banks. I'm referred in by banks constantly. These are the day-to-day issues. You think IT is complicated? When you have these things, it comes up every day. And you have to play by the rules. Because when shareholders fight, what happens? Attorneys get sued. They blame the attorney. Is there a conflict?
So I was going back to something else. In your original example there with the two-member company, where you say have the language in the agreement where you say, look, I'm just representing the company. Is there ever, have you experienced a problem down the line where the members or the shareholders get into a fight, and then you're subpoenaed to testify as to the intent of the provisions that were drafted because you ultimately did help them?
It's no different. What kind of law do you practice?
Corporate law.
It's the same like with a will. Yes, you're the first one that would be on the stand.
And doesn't that, I mean, is there a way to get them to
What I try to do,
I find that, I think that creates problems.
it does create problems. And corporate shareholder litigation rarely is less than a couple $100,000. It's worse than a major divorce because you're talking about someone's livelihood. As anyone who's tried cases, you know 90% settle. You have to get them before mediation or get them before any type of arbitration and get cooler heads to prevail. It gets bitter. I know one with one of the professional sporting teams, a couple of people got indicted. But it comes out of these affairs. Whether you did drugs will come up. Whether you were absent because you had a girlfriend will come up. Whether you gamble a lot will come up. Whether you ran expenses will come up. So I usually try to get them to do something alternative. and get cooler heads to prevail. Otherwise, you're going to have a 3-year litigation, and the business is going to suffer. And I'll get into that. What I usually try to do is a shotgun or estrangement clause that I'll get into in a little later. But you're right. I mean, but I do represent the company. Unless I am negotiating this. Say I've known John. Say John is starting a business. He's an old client. One client's been in probably 8 businesses in the last 5 years. And he's going into business with this gentleman. I represent John. And I will say that from up front. But if they walk in together, my loyalty has to be XYZ unless something comes up during that meeting and they say to me, you represent John. Or they'll ask me my opinion. And I'll say, this is only my opinion. There's 27 flavors at Baskins and Robbins. But this is my opinion. And I've seen it. Okay, you represent John. And I'll get back and I'll say what you said earlier. You can always find another singer. You can always find another IT guy. There's a ton of them coming out of college every year. But it's a matter of opinion. But if I'm representing Ed, and I was talking to this gentleman here earlier, about a parachute, a CEO of a parachute, this guy is invaluable. You can't find him. There's only 2 or 3 in the world. And I was negotiating with this New York lawyer a couple years ago, and I said, you can't offend him. You can't find him. Even though your company's paying a couple $100 million for this business, you need him. And I said to him, I said, I'm not negotiating with you. I'm not harassing you. I'm just telling you what the facts are. So it's all negotiable. But you try to avoid problems in this area. And if you're a corporate lawyer, you build inside the agreement something to protect yourself from fights. A business cannot just sustain a couple years of inner fighting. It hurts the business. I've had 2 people in the last couple weeks tell me that because of inner fighting, people hate to work there. They despise going to work. There's nothing worse than walking into a working environment where 2 owners are clashing.
Yeah, my problem is that you want to have open communication and negotiations, right? When the clients are negotiating sensitive provisions of the agreement, and it's difficult for you to do the work of an attorney if you know that you may be subpoenaed to talk about that in the future. And that's why I find those situations, those initial situations that you're talking about, where the 2 guys come in together, it makes it difficult to have a real sort of representation where you discuss and advocate because
when you're dealing with the shareholders agreement, you cannot advocate. When I get into the provisions, which Jeffrey will be getting into later, I don't advocate. I give them alternatives. I tell them what is normal, whether you're paying a 5-year payout or an 8-year payout or a 3-year payout, what the interest rate should be. I tell them what is normal. But I'll jump ahead just a little bit then. As I said, I try to avoid fights. And this is purely practical experience. In every new engagement, if I'm drafting the operating agreement, which you're talking about, and we're jumping way ahead, I normally try to put an estrangement in. And it's also called a shotgun clause. Does anyone know what that is?
It's like a buy-sell mechanism where we disagree and we can't continue together. I will set a price on it, and you can say to me, okay, you said $10 million, and you get to decide whether you're a buyer at that price or you can put it to me. And
the option 8 decides. Okay, he's exactly right. It's 2 shareholders, 2 members, 2 partners. All the agreements are the same. I don't care if it's a shareholders agreement. I don't care if it's a limited liability company, an LLC operating agreement, or an LP agreement, a limited partnership. They're all the same. It's all the same provisions. You just redraft. But many times, there are problems down the line. And there's usually a problem when you're not making enough or you're making too much money. And one person is taking all the credit, or one person's blaming the other person why we're not making the profits or the gross revenues that we anticipated. You hear me say time and time again, I want to avoid litigation. So I will go in and will say to John, I can't work with you anymore. I'm not giving you a reason. You have an opportunity to buy me out over the next, and if I'm the offeror, it's usually, I'll usually put something like 90 days. But why? You want the other side to have to think about it. He's caught off guard. And he has to get his financing. So you say, you can buy me out during the next 90 days. And I usually put in there a premium. But if you don't buy me out, I have to buy you out over the next 30 days after this 90-day period. And it's usually at a premium. I've seen it at a discount. I've seen it all over the place. But the good part about it, it's over. It's over. And it's usually only, and I've done it, what I'm trying to say is, I usually do it after 5 years or 3 years or 7 years or every odd year. I've seen it all over the place. There is no strict rule. But if John and Ed start the business and Ed's saying, John, you put your money in, but I haven't seen you. You're a silent member. And I'm willing to pay a premium up front. So you can buy me out, knowing that John just put the money in. He can't run the company. But if John's in there and he started up, do you think John should get a premium on his $1 million? I'll usually put the fair market value 1.5 times fair market value, or 125% of fair market value. And I usually do this because it is severe. Cash. You have to pay cash at closing.
Doesn't the person pick the number? It's not a fair market value calculation. It's I fix the number at whatever I want, and then you either say I'm taking it at that number, or you take it.
I've seen it all over the place. And going back to what you said over here, you have the client tell you. If you were in the meeting, I would say, yes, I've seen that. I've also seen the yearly valuation. I've also say it gets valued by the CPA, who's the normal CPA of the company, and it's 1.5 times that. And it's cash. But if you don't buy me out, I will buy you out at that number 30 days later and give you cash. I've also seen, confuse you a little further, if I'm the offeror and you're buying me out, I will finance it. I have to finance it because it's severe penalty. The guy's leaving. You're kicking him out of the business indirectly without a fight. So you look all over the place. So it's only fair for the offeree to have 3 years or 5 years to pay it off. But if I buy you out, since I already thought it out and I planned this, I have to pay you cash. So am I representing either of them in that? No, I'm representing the company. I push for it. It's easy to get inside the document when they're getting along. Once they're fighting, you'll never get it. That's when this gentleman makes money. And he gets bitter. And he gets mean. And a lot of cobwebs come out that you don't want the public to know. But it moves the company along. Any questions on that? No? Okay, when you're talking about starting a business or buying a business, we'll get very basic. What are some of the factors? What are the different types of business entities? when someone wants to buy a business or start a business.
Different types of entities?
Yeah.
You mean like a
I want to start a business. I came to you. You're the lawyer.
S Corp, C Corp?
So wait, let's start with corporations. You can be a corporation. And inside a corporation, you have an S Corp or B, a C Corp. What else?
LLC.
An LLC, which is limited liability company.
LLP.
LP. That's a limited partnership. What else?
Sole proprietorship, general partnership.
Okay, so you got a general partnership. And 5 is a sole proprietorship. What's the cheapest? Sole proprietor. What if the sole proprietor wants to do business as Further Ed? Is there a cost? Can he just start that name?
Usually you gotta file like an assumed name certificate in the county clerk, but that's how you do it in New York.
And in Philadelphia, you have to advertise it. The ad runs you $500. I mean, clients, when we tell clients, they go, whoa. I go, here, you can write the check directly. We don't see that money. It goes directly to the legal. It has to be in a paper of general circulation. It has to be in a legal newspaper. But what's the problem for a client eventually when you register a fictitious name for a sole proprietor? They start it up as Further Ed. He calls me up, someone calls me up, and I want to start this online business as Further Ed. What's the downside of doing a fictitious name? That's very rarely thought about.
Well, if you're a sole proprietorship, you have unlimited liability, notwithstanding the fact that you're using an assumed name.
You have unlimited liability. But what's the second problem? I just spent 5 years advertising this name, promoting it, marketing it. It's not searched. There is no legal search in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania when you register a fictitious name, even though it's in a paper of general circulation and a legal newspaper. I've seen many clients over the years, 4 or 5 years down the line, when they want to incorporate or set up a limited liability or LLC or go for a trademark, they find out someone else has been using the name. I shy away from it for that reason. It could come back to bite you if you properly market the name and it has value. A partnership is 2 individuals. As this gentleman over here said, both the partnership and a sole proprietor, you have unlimited liability. That means you're liable for any and all business expenses or liabilities. If the client has any risk in a business, we avoid both. In Pennsylvania, primarily, we've been using LLCs lately. It's the easiest, it's the quickest way. To draft the operating agreement takes 95% of the time. You need an operating agreement to put between the members what their rights are and what their obligations are. An LP, we don't use that often because the general partner, Alvin LP, has unlimited liability. In Pennsylvania, we have a capital stock tax that Jeffrey can go into. And if an LLC owns real estate, when it's sold years later, you can have an additional tax that could be sizable. It's scheduled to go away January 1, 2014, but like a lot of taxes, I cannot guarantee clients. So what we have been doing over the years is having the LP buy the real estate with an LLC as a general partner. I'll repeat that. In Pennsylvania, we have a capital stock tax. It only comes up when the property's sold, but it can be sizable if you have a sizable gain. There is no capital stock tax on an LP, a limited partnership. So when we buy real estate, We usually buy it in an LP with an LLC as the general partner. We'll own 1% or 0.5% because they have a limited liability. Corporations, Jeffrey will go into the difference between an S Corp and a C Corp. The LLC and an S Corp are normally taxed similar. You have pass-through. So if clients ever want to draw out their capital account, there's not a problem. What are some of the other factors on what entity you use?
How many shareholders?
Number of shareholders, types of shareholders. Jeffrey will get into what kind of shareholders can own S stock. There are certain restrictions on that. What else? Costs, operations. People say a corporation's more expensive to operate. I don't agree necessarily. It's not much more. I want clients to have meetings. I want clients to review stuff. Any other questions on that? Okay. The biggest thing when you start up a company or you purchase a company, give me.
And that one, also flexibility in your arrangements in terms of capital stock.
An LLC has much more flexibility, and with the managers, and even with the allocations of profits. How's some of the equity? Give me some of the factors on equity allocation. Give me some of the examples. You have two people come in, three members. And what are some of the examples? How they own a company? How is the interest allocated? How are the shares allocated among the three members? And what are some of the issues?
I mean, obviously they're allocated with shares and certificate.
Yeah, but how do you base it on? What do you base it on?
The money in.
Oh, the money that comes
Investor.
in, or the agreed value of a contribution to the.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you,
Is it always money?
it's not always money, it can be an asset, that you value a certain
sweat.
amount for purposes of equity.
Sweat. One is sweat. What else?
Intellectual property, business ideas.
Give me some of the examples. What if we're talking about, John, passive, purely passive investment? How can I protect John? I represent John.
Preferred shares.
What do you mean by that?
Different types of equity that you can give. You can give voting, non-voting, preferred, and they have different rights. So preferred shares have certain rights to remove, certain activities can't occur. So Ed couldn't sell certain assets of the company without John's approval. Gives him certain veto rights.
So you give them veto. You want supermajority votes on certain items.
Different board allocations, perhaps the preferred would get more board seats, or it gives you control and flexibility between the different different types of owners.
Okay, what if I represent a bank then? And they don't want it out that they own this finance company. Happens all the time. I've had quite a few banks are invested in subprime lenders, but they don't want the public to know it. What did they take? What did the bank take? They didn't want stock.
They took debt.
Debt? How? What kind of debt?
I don't know what they took.
The company sold. They wanted their share.
They had outstanding loans.
Pardon?
You could take a convertible instrument of some sort.
Convertible. You're exactly right. But during the time period, I'm going to confuse those of you that do a lot of business. They were getting 10%. So they got their money. But they can always convert their debt into equity. Happens all the time. In today's world, if I'm dealing with a hedge fund, mainly they want preferred stock or they want debt. The reason being, they're getting interest. They're getting interest on their investment at all times.
They're also higher up in the capital structure.
Excuse me, what did you say?
They're also higher up in the capital structure. I mean, they get paid out first in many cases.
Exactly. So if it gets paid before the common stock or before the member's interest. But it's so important in today's world, if you're looking for financing, you have to be open-minded, you have to be creative, and know what they're looking for. The one I saw just the other day, he had voting preferred. That was equal to the common. That's rare. And they were putting in $10 million at 8%. Cumulative. And they demanded it. As Jeffrey says out of Wharton, they tell you what's good for you and they tell you what's good for them. And a lot of them don't negotiate. And you have to be willing to walk away. They're belligerent, they're arrogant, they're condescending. And I was talking to someone earlier, many of them do not understand, if this is a map of the United States, the Northeast Corridor. They have no clue. They never ran a business. They never operated a business. They don't know that many of the business deals are made over a phone based on relationships. But they have the book knowledge. And they'll sit there and demand this. Where they may want, what they may want, is critical issues that they have to have a vote on. I don't have a problem with that. If the company's going to be sold, if Ed's going to pull out a lot of money, if he's going to change the profile of the company, you want supermajority vote. That's more than majority. But allow Ed to run the company. I'm not going to allow a 29-year-old person to walk in a room and tell me how to run a construction company. It just won't work. It's like a 29-year-old kid becoming a manager of a professional basketball or baseball team. It doesn't work. There are certain things you don't learn from school. And when they come in, they will do their due diligence. And if you do corporate law in New York, they'll come with a stack of documents like this when they're starting a business or buying a business. And I usually scratch my head, I go, great document, phenomenal. Someone has to sign it now. Someone told me 40 years ago, any one of us can draft the best document in the world. Someone has to buy it. And many times, I just had one, my first deal that did not close. I always close. And I don't know where he found these documents. He had every clause you possibly could find in every form book, but it did not combine. And I looked at it, and I said, I'm confused. I mean, where'd you get this document? It wasn't practical. And the following week, I had another client buy another business with an attorney out of Philadelphia. And when we're done, I said, ma'am, this closing was pleasurable. The document was practical. It reached the point. It protected his client or her client, and it protected my client. And we had like 5 changes in the document. But there's no reason to fight. But when you're looking at this, our job is to be creative. Our job is to know what you have to do to get financing. And these hedge funds, these large banks, they want today, in today's world, they're not lending money. They want to get a kicker on the outside. If the client's going to grow from a business doing $5 million to $100 million, and everyone intends an exit, they want a kicker on convertible debt. Many times, and keep this in mind when you're starting a business or purchasing a business. I've done it both ways. I've had clients know their exit strategy is in 5 years. They will go throughout they usually go along the East Coast. Say they're starting a lending company. Banks do not have the wherewithal to start a new business. They'll pick up my client who will go in and say, let's start a business, we need $100 million. I'm using a large number of financing. That is what they're going to lend out. It will cost $8 million to set up the business. I'll put $1 million in, you put $7 million. But the exit strategy is after 5 years, I can do a put or call. The point I'm trying to make is after a short period of time, my client gets out and he turns over the business to the bank. Then the bank has a business, a going concern, and they'll put a new management team in. But from day one, we know we're leaving after 3 years. I've seen a couple where you said just open your mind every odd year. 5, 7, 9 years. I can walk. I have to give them 6 months notice. The purchase price is a variable based on EBITDA, and we walk. The bank likes it, but we got the financing. I've had one client do it 4 times in the last 20 years. He started 3, 4 different businesses, 4 different banks. And he usually puts some money in there, but his contribution to capital is sweat. He has the contacts. He can set up the offices in 20 states, and he has the people he can call. And when he leaves, he usually has a 1 or 2 year restricted covenant that he cannot compete. But when you're dealing with this, keep in mind, which we said, it's either based on cash, sweat, or debt. And debt can be preferred stock, and it's normally convertible. Any questions on this? Does everyone in the room understand what a put and call means? If I'm starting out. Say John, we're dealing with John putting in the money. John wants to be able to get his money out after a certain period of time. And he's a passive investor. So if during the, say, a 5-year period, he's only called in for a supermajority vote on critical issues, such as selling the business, or starting a new business, or buying another business, or bringing in any employee who makes above $200,000, or for any financing above X dollars. He wants to have notification. But John wants to be able to get out. He doesn't want his $1 million. John doesn't like Ed that much. He's just given him $1 million. So after so many years, he wants to be able to put his stock to Ed. Put means after 5 years, he can say to Ed, you have to buy me out. I'm converting my $1 million into common stock, which is worth 50% of the company, because it's based on a number from day one, and you have to give me 5 times EBITDA, earnings before interest and taxes and amortization. And you have to pay me cash. Those of you who are looking for financing, you can find it. It takes work. We had someone in here for the last course I taught, and he works at a real estate company. And that's what his job is, to send out the booklets to show banks, insurance companies along the East Coast and how to raise financing. And he says very few of them do not have convertible stock or convertible debt. People will lend you money, but they're not looking for the 6 or 8% a year. They're looking for the home run through conversion. Any questions on that? Do you do that often? No? You're looking for that kind of financing now.
Working on a few financing deals now, but,
Okay, a couple of people said we want to talk about financing. Are banks lending money? Barely? What do you need to get money? Nah, that doesn't work.
Liquidity.
Pardon me?
Liquidity.
What's your definition of liquidity?
Ready cash reserve.
I don't think it matters.
Cash reserve. We do hotel building. And we used to be able to do hotel building at 95.5 financing.
No, what I'm saying to you is your definition of liquidity. The company, the business has to have liquidity. They have to have cash flow. I'll give you an example. Jeffrey and I own, say, 12 pieces of real estate in the center of Philadelphia. No debt. Can we walk in and say 2033 is worth $2 million? I pay myself rent when I need it. Will the bank lend me money on it?
Nowhere near the $2 million.
Pardon me?
Nowhere near your $2 million.
Will they give me $1 million on it?
Maybe.
Jeffrey, what's the answer?
No.
No. No.
You have to be able to turn that $2 million property into ready capital in a 30-day period.
They can sell it overnight.
What's it worth?
It's right on Rittenhouse Square. They can sell it overnight.
For what?
$2 million. All renovated, brand new. First class. It doesn't matter. The point I'm trying to make is you have to walk in the banks, and what I said earlier with the guys with their ties off, button-down shirts, you better have a pro forma showing that bank how you're paying back that loan from the lender. It's irrelevant that I have $8 million of other real estate or $10 million of other real estate, or I got $3 million in the bank. They don't want to hear it. Because when they do the rubber stamp with their boss, they have to show 2033 has enough cash flow, liquidity, what you just said, to pay back that loan. That's what they want to see. It's irrelevant. You got 12 other properties that are free and clear right in the center of town. They don't want to hear it. So my job, if a client's coming in, and clients don't want to pay for it when they're starting up. When they're buying a business, they'll have enough cash set aside to show, and that's where the CPAs, I'm getting back to where we started from. We all have to work together. I have to say to you, you're the CPA. Show me what we're going to borrow, how we're going to repay it. Also have a whole section on management. What the experience is, what they've been doing, what you're selling. You do a booklet. And it may take, similar to the free agents that are out there in basketball, it takes one to buy. You don't need 10 buyers. But negotiate them against one another. When you're purchasing business or buying a business, you have to do your homework. Banks are lending money. But you have to walk in there like you're dealing with a 3-year-old and lay it out for them. Show them that. And I said to the one banker, I said, you want me to make 2033? I could take out the rent and pay back the loan. I'll just lower my salary. It doesn't mean anything to me. What do you want? You tell me what you want. But you start getting, when it's yourself, you get very abrupt. If I'm negotiating to a client, I'll say to the client, this is what give it to me, and it's done. But when it happens to you, you say, it's stupid. Come on, you're crazy. It doesn't matter. Because you got all the other buildings. I said, take a lien on anything you want. I don't really care. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to borrow off these buildings. It doesn't matter. You have to do your homework. And as the attorney, if you're the leader, you have to get the CPA to understand what you want. And then you better edit it like you're writing to a judge so a 3-year-old can understand it. Show the numbers. Show the cash flow. Show the projections. Show where you are 3 years. And when you're dealing with banks, I don't care. It's something they learn. If you have a business doing $2 million one year, 1.8 the next year, and 1.6 the next year, they'll lend money to another business doing 800, $1.2 million, $1.4 million quicker. They want to see it going up. They want to see cash flow going up. They hate numbers going down. You have financial covenants. Financial covenants are NBA covenants, ratios that bells and whistles go off. And they want to see it. But who are the lenders out there? You have banks. Who else? Insurance companies, life insurance companies. You got private venture. You have to send it out. I've had clients, they hire someone, once the booklet's made, they'll send out 50 of them. It only takes one to bite. And you have to show that it's profitable. You have to show where it's going, where it came from, where it's going. Clients don't want it. The best clients I have always have 5-year projections. And then we go to meetings and we want to know what happened. The best privately owned clients I have will have meetings a couple times a year and make the head of manufacturing, the CFO, and the head of sales come in and report and explain to the outside board what happened. Why didn't you make the numbers and where we're going? And they probably are thinking about that every 3 months that they have to report to that board. Yes, we're rubber stamping what the owner wants, but it forces them to go through it. And that's what they project to the banks. Let's just say one of these financial covenants we're not going to meet. Should I wait until it's breached? Should I wait until the financials come out? Or should I tell ahead of time? What do you do? If you know you're not going to make a covenant.
Ask for a waiver.
Pardon me?
Ask for a
When?
waiver.
After it's done? When the financials come out or before?
Probably before.
Okay, and what's going to happen when you do the waiver? So people expect this. So people know what's going to happen.
I have to pay money to do a waiver. It costs me a lot
Exactly
of
right. It's a way for the bank to earn extra interest. The fact that you're breaching a financial covenant, does it mean the loan's at risk?
Probably not.
Absolutely no. Rarely. Rarely. But it's a bell and whistle that will tell the MBA types that things aren't going as planned. When you negotiate a loan, I make sure I review with the CPA all financial covenants and how much stretch room we have in them. You will have them just sent to you. Many clients will just sign the documents as submitted without doing the test. I usually like to see what happens at slow times a year. There's nothing wrong with negotiating that you may be out of covenant 3 months a year and negotiate it inside the document. If we have a slow period that we know we're slow and we're going to meet the covenants at the end of September, but June's a slow month, so we will negotiate inside the document. When you're doing lending documents, read them and give the CPA his job to read them. And I want to know. I don't want the client calling me up and saying, I didn't know that was inside that document. What you want when you're negotiating this, you're looking for a commitment letter. Similar to a letter of intent to buy a business. People say to me, why do we spend the time doing an LOI, a letter of intent, if it's not binding? Why do we do the time to do the commitment letter when it's not the loan? Why?
Save a lot of time and money before you get to the complicated documents. People could, the important issues are fleshed out.
Get them off the table. Get the important issues off the table. Because there's nothing worse. You're a corporate lawyer. I'm calling you up and you're going, well, it's in the letter of intent. Or it's in the commitment letter. And what am I supposed to say? It's the most important document you sign, even though it's non-binding. And the bank doesn't have, there's wording in that commitment letter they can get out of it. Or same with the LOI. I said that to a client today. He goes, it's an LOI. We'll negotiate that later. I said, you won't negotiate it later. Once it's in writing, it's etched in stone. Get these issues off the table now. It takes me 3 hours to do a letter of intent. To get through a binding agreement may take me 100 hours. So get it in the letter of intent. So if there's financial covenants, I want to know what they are up front. I don't want someone from a major New York law firm telling me what they're going to be after you got 50 hours in the job. Same with the convertible, if they can convert. I want to know up front. There was one recently which said buying a business that your salary will be negotiated. I said to the client, they got an $8 million loan coming in as preferred stock at 8%. So they know they're getting $640,000 a year. What are you getting for managing the company next year? You don't know what your salary is. What are you going to do when we're at the closing table and they finally submit that document? Let's get it off the table now. If there's veto rights, I want to know them now. If there's 5 people on the board, does he have the control and vote? What does anti-dilution mean? Does anyone know?
You mean on a capital call? Failed to meet a capital call?
This guy came in the other day, a hedge fund, and he said you have anti-dilution rights. But it was meaningless. I said to the client, so what he's saying to you, he controls the board. He's buying a business. So he can put another $4 million in as a loan, and you have to put another $4 million. It's as a loan that he'll put in as preferred stock. So he is diluting you from 40% to 20% overnight without any risk on his part. Because he controls the board, he'll buy a treasury note that's not at risk, and it's there. It's legal. And it says you're represented by counsel. But these are things, we're getting into ethics, competency is the biggest issue, and seeing what goes wrong, seeing what they do. I mean, how do you know I'm able to talk to you about your war stories? Because I've seen them from the corporate side. I see the lawsuits. And someone told me back in 1974, you can draft all the documents in the world. You don't know a problem with it until you litigate it, until a stranger reads it. And you can rush through these documents until you see someone diluting your client's stock portfolio by a loan through preferred stock. The money's going in. You want, I'm putting $4 million in, you put $4 million in. What do we have? Litigation? That's what we end up with. And we're going to lose. So it's all in the letter of intent. It's all in the commitment letter. But when you're going for money, make sure everything's spelled out in the commitment letter and you understand it. And make sure your client does a full booklet up front with gross receipts, where they came from, where they will be, and how that loan is being repaid over the next 5 years. What are some of the other factors that you should negotiate when you're borrowing money? Some of the variables that could come back to haunt your client. I'll throw something out of you. Would you negotiate the commitment fee or the attorney's fees? I represent the borrower. The bank wants, what does he want on that loan, Jeff? 2% or 4%? 2%. And it says they'll use outside independent counsel. What of the two should I negotiate?
I like half the legal fees.
Why not the commitment fee?
Because that's their money and you want their money. If you take it from them, they're just going to put it somewhere else. They'll raise the interest rate. They're going to get their money one way or another.
And who gets part of that commitment fee?
Who gets part of the commitment fee?
Mm-hmm. Giving you inside scoop now.
Not the attorney.
Not the attorney. Who gets part of the commitment fee? The lending officer. It's part of his bonus. So when you go in, I'm going to ask you, what is your authority? I don't want to negotiate with someone who's a branch manager who has a $50,000 cap or a $500,000 cap. If you're going in for a $2 million loan, I want to know you have authority for a $2 million loan. Otherwise, let's talk to the head guy. It's like talking to a law clerk versus a judge. The law clerk doesn't have any authority. Pardon me?
Yes, he does.
He has influence with the judge. But also, I want to know, I'd rather allow you make the profit. If I walk and it's 2 points on $10 million and you get a 15 or 25% override at the end of the year, you want that loan to close. On the other side, I don't want to use you with 2 years experience and paying legal fees to draft major documents that you have only done 3 times before. And banks give the documentation to law firms that send business inside the bank. And they'll put a young associate in Philadelphia to making $140,000 a year to working until 11 o'clock at night that I don't know how any lawyer can work after 7, and the room's spinning, and you're paying $300 an hour to have that work done. So I will cap it. If I want to get strong and I put a lot of pressure, I will say to the bank, you can do it in-house. I don't need an outside lawyers. You can do this loan. You want this loan? I can give this loan to you. But I want to put a cap, I want it done in-house. They have the capability of doing it in-house. They'll go to outside lawyers as a favor. But I will always cap the lawyer's fee. I will try to give the client, give the bank their commitment fee. I will also try to put a cap on appraisers and outside costs. Because you've seen loans, you can go up to 8-9% on fees. And it's outrageous. And they don't care if you don't care. They'll put it in the commitment letter. But on major loans that there's a long-term relationship, and a lot of outside banks are coming into many of these major cities from out of state to lend money. And they're looking for loans. But you have to be flexible. You have to be able to have a client not get disturbed by saying no, and shop it. Also, one thing Jeffrey and I have learned, get a couple commitment letters. Have banks compete. Know what the other banks are offering.
You let them know that there's another bank?
I do.
Yeah.
Positive. It's a mean business, and I shop it. My best clients shop their loans every other year. And they'll move. And let the banker knows we're going to move. If I have a bad relationship, I've just done this with a trust officer. I said, I want John off the file. If not, I'm going to remove the bank. I don't want him on. And they remove their officer. First, I'll try to handle it inside. And I'll tell them, you know, if you can shop it, you can, but I don't want to negotiate. I mean, it's the old philosophy, your best new client is the one you already have. Keep them. And banks can make a lot of money. But you have to let them know that I have two commitment letters. And the other bank's not charging me this. And if you want it, match it. But you want to know that you're going to grow with the bank. I don't want to go to a small bank. I don't want to be the biggest loan at that bank. But I do want a lending officer who has practical experience. I have zero problem, zero, with a senior lending officer telling me, Joe, you're full of crap. No. Yes, no. But I don't want to have a young lawyer saying to me, well, it's the banking policy. I want it out. I'm not going to sign it. Then we won't give you the loan. I think you better tell your boss first. And don't treat me like that or get off the file or I'll call the senior lawyer. Good lawyers, it's fun. This area of the law is fun. And you know what you have, you know what you can get, and you know what you can't get. And it's based on a lot of experience. I mean, like the banks will never waive a monetary breach. But if it's a financial covenant or a word breach, there's no problem giving you 30 days notice to cure. If it takes longer, it takes longer as long as you're curing it. Or I've had some banks, senior banking officers say to me, we'll allow you to breach 3 times a year and cure it, or 2 times a year, or 3 times over a 2-year period. But we're not going to let you breach every month, Joe. Okay, I can understand that. But I don't need a young person telling me if the bank's at the bank's sole discretion if they don't feel you're bank worthy. What's that mean? I tell them it's black and white. You're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. Same with an employment contract. I want a breach that it's black and white, that we all know. But I don't want gray areas, that it's at the bank's sole and absolute discretion. If you insist on that, I'll take the loan elsewhere. If it's a client who's not credit worthy, it's a different story. But once you get a powerful client who has proper cash flows, who's been in business for a number of years, that you took from that $3.2 million loan, now they're borrowing $50 million unsecured, but they're doing $300 million of business a year, with A1 clients or customers, it's a pleasure. And none of this should be adversarial. And I don't want that point to come across. It should be a pleasurable area of the law, as long as you're dealing with professionals. Before Jeff comes on, I want to just cover a couple quick issues. We've got a question from online. If you represent the company, should you advise the cash each member to attain their own counsel to review the structure of the company? As I said earlier, if they come to me and if I don't have a conflict, if I can maintain my independence, I will tell them they have a right, they can, but I won't direct them to go that they have to. I will allow them to waive the conflict because it's extremely difficult. An attorney has to earn his fee. And I don't need someone who doesn't have practical experience trying to draft a document or structure a document, who doesn't have the business acumen, who doesn't have the understanding of where we're headed. But if they come to me without any friction among them or between them, I will not demand that they see independent counsel. I will have them waive it, but I'll tell them, and it's inside the document, that they have a right to have the document reviewed. And a couple quick issues I want to cover before Jeff gets on. If you have a client buying a business and there's sizable funds, you have to keep the core of the business together. And as part of counsel, you will want a stay bonus. You will want to meet with those employees. You will want to make sure they're locked in as a condition of staying. Most of my most successful clients are surrounded by 3 to 4 key individuals. Any company, if they're going to grow from $500,000 a year in gross revenues to the millions, the senior shareholder or the senior member will be surrounded by at least 3 other individuals. One will be finance, the accounting, CFO. One will be manufacturing, and one will be sales. And you have to tie those individuals in. I have a couple clients say, well, they're making great money. Big deal. If he or she dies, or even when the business is doing well, they will cherry pick them. If you have a client buying a business, you have to be positive that that person will stay once you close. And it can be done 22 different ways. I've seen it done through phantom stock. I've seen it done through stay bonuses. You need a golden parachute in there, or a deferred compensation. They're all one and the same. If I close tomorrow, I want to be positive that you're going to stay for at least 3 years. If I have a client who's walking away with X million, there's nothing wrong with making sure you are paid $1 million. It's not going to change anything that my client does in the near or foreseeable future. I had one client walk away with 9 figures. But 4 key individuals each walked away with a few $1 million. They were set up for life. There's nothing wrong with that. So they did stay for the changeover. They had to stay 2 years before they were paid. So you want some kind of incentive. One other issue before Jeffrey gets on, legal opinions on buying a business, on closing a loan. Hear me loud. Do not commit malpractice. You're not a title insurance company. I've never, ever seen a sale that got blown out or a loan not closed because I'm so strict on my opinion letters. And when I get that young attorney, they'll give it to me. I'll say, go to your senior partner who checks on opinion letters, see if you'll sign that in reverse. You're not a title company. For those of you who want to see an opinion letter, just email me and I'll send you one. But make sure you do not guarantee against all litigation, all debts, all taxes. I will say, based on this good standing certificate, he has the power. The reason they came into play 30, 40 years ago is a buyer or a seller or a bank does not want a client to say, I did not understand what I signed. And I'll opine on that I explained the documents, they're legally binding documents. That's about it. I will say they're in good standing, they got the power to do it, and I explain these documents to the client. But I am not a title insurance company. My malpractice does not cover that. And you're going to get some major firms who put this opinion in front of you. So don't think because you sign your name over your letterhead, you're important. It will come back to haunt you eventually. They will sue you if there's a breach of that opinion letter. So I will say to the young attorney, it's way before you were even born. Clients said they didn't understand the document. And I will say to the bank, I explained them, they're binding documents. I'm more than willing to opine on that. The client closed, then I will say to my actual knowledge on other items. But I will put in there, that means I did not do an investigation. They'll say to you, okay, say to the best of your knowledge. No, I'm not going to do my best of my knowledge. What does that mean? You're an attorney, you're a litigator.
Need a lot of things.
Can it come back to bite you?
Sure can.
Or to my constructive knowledge? No. I will say my firm did not represent him in any litigation. That's all I can say. I'm not a title insurance company. And I cannot, and I will not search the records in every county, in every state. What are some of the issues now on one other ethical issue? Clients. Most clients are doing business in more than one state. Can you represent them? Clients buying a business in Utah. Can I go out and close? And can I render an opinion letter?
You have to limit your opinion to the state in which you're...
And plus the general laws of the state of Delaware. That's what I do right at the end. I am not a member of the Utah Bar. I'm a member of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Jeffrey's a member of the state of Jersey, but we're basing this all on the general laws of the state of Delaware. Okay? Thank you.
Let me get to the right slide first. Start off. All right, there we go. I'm Jeff Pizzolo. I'm going to talk about some of the documents that you have to use to set up first the selection of a business entity, the operating agreement, how to set up certain different things such as an S Corp, how to make a C election for certain situations or an S election, C election for an LLC, that type of stuff. Then I'm going to get into some of the other documents, some of the important provisions in an operating agreement, which is important so you don't end up running into conflicts. Then I'll go into provisions on the employment agreements, what types of provisions that you should have in there. And then finally I'll end up getting into, well, I don't know where she went, but the provisions on how to protect your proprietary information with confidentiality agreements and that type of stuff. So the first thing I'm going to end up touching on, it was touched on earlier, is the selection of business entities, but I'm going to go a little more in detail and probably have a little more discussion on why you choose one versus the other. I know this is probably something a lot of people know, but there are probably some people in the audience that don't necessarily know the nuts and bolts as much. So there's generally 4 or 5 major factors that you have to deal with. The first one is the tax implications. There's the whether you have limited liability. There's transferability. There's the number of owners you have, the flexibility of distributions. All of these, it depends on what you want, and that ends up deciding what type of entity you end up choosing. So for instance, with tax, there's, as most people know, flow through, double taxation. Another area that a lot of people miss is the self-employment tax. So you end up running into self-employment tax if you have a partnership or an LLC or a sole proprietorship, and that'll actually go into one of the situations where sometimes people make LLCs and they actually elect to do an S election, although it still has the same flow through, you end up avoiding some of the self-employment taxes. The second main thing, limited liability, that's pretty straightforward. You're only liable to the amount of income that you end up, or the amount of equity that you've put into the company, so you're not unlimitedly liable on that one. If you have a $10,000 debt, let's say the company has a $100,000 debt and you only have $10,000, they can't go after your personal assets for that one, which is pretty straightforward. The third one is going into transferability. Certain entities are it's easier to transfer interest than other ones. And one of the biggest transferability areas, especially in New York, is the public trading. So that's one of the situations. A lot of times people go, well, if an LLC has this flexibility and it still has a limited liability, why would I use a C Corp? So that's one of the situations is with public trading. You have to be a C Corp. And then the last, you have the number of owners. So this comes into play a lot of places with the S Corps. It comes into play with how the LLC is treated, how the different situations with that. And then the last important thing that you end up looking for is the flexibility of distributions, which is generally, so corporations on the one end, it has to be straight up. If I have 25%, then I have to receive 25% of any dividend of the capital and such. Whereas for a partnership, you can get a little more, there's a little more play in there. So for one situation that would be is, we were talking about Ed and, I forget the names, Ed and Jim, John. So John has all the money, he puts $1 million in, and Ed doesn't, he's working with the firm. So one thing that you might be able to do is, Ed's going to want his money back, John is going to end up wanting his money back. So you can set it up so for the first $1 million that come in, until he gets his capital back, you can do this with a partnership, but you can't do that with a corporation where he ends up getting 90% of all distributions or 90% of income to help with that. So, and then there's also other situations where you have the different types of owners, which you have to look into. So for instance, with S Corps are very restrictive on, as I said, the number of owners. They're also restricted on the type of owners that you can have in there. And then the last one is if you want to have different classes of ownership, so that's another issue where you have the S Corp in there with that one. So it's kind of small for people in here. Probably a little easier if it's on the computer. So I guess instead of going through this nuts and bolts and everything, so if you end up having a client come in and it's 3-4 people, they just want to start a business off the cuff. They want limited liability. I guess everyone would probably end up, actually, I can answer my own question on that one. Everyone would probably recommend an LLC. But what are the situations? So the other options you have, generally, let's go through, the options you have is sole proprietorship, which is if no one else is, if it's just one person. That's single flow through, no limited liability, and for transferability, this ends up becoming trouble because whereas with corporations I can go, here's 5 shares of stock, now you own 5 shares of stock. With this one, I have to do an asset sale to sell everything because there is no entity. It's deemed as you're owning it individually. The next one is usually the general partnership, which is a lot of people end up in this either because they don't want to hire a lawyer or they end up because they create an informal partnership and it doesn't actually, they didn't go through have a lawyer draft and file with the state. So this is, again, flow through, you get the other, the main issue you can run in with this one is, with transferability is that sometimes you have Ed and Jim, if they, like for instance, if they have real estate, Ed and John might have the real estate in their name, and they might contribute it to the partnership, but still in their name. So you end up running into transferability issues with that one. So yeah, then the next one is generally the limited partnership, where, as most people know, you have the general partner, and the general partner is unlimited liable, usually 1% or 2% interest in the entity. And then you have the limited partners who can't have an active role in there. Then you have the limited liability company. So what situations would you, I guess, want to use maybe a limited partnership versus a limited liability company? Are limited partnerships extinct? This might actually be a more Pennsylvania specific type question. But are there any situations where you'd want to use a limited partnership?
If I'm buying real estate in Pennsylvania, apparently.
Yeah, yeah, that's an easy one. So sometimes where you'd want an LP versus an LLC is certain states might have taxes that only apply to LLCs. So for instance, in Pennsylvania, there's the capital stock tax. It's going to be, they're getting rid of it supposedly in 2014, but you end up running into, there might be other states, I figure it's online, so you might have people from other states where there might be extra taxes that apply to LLCs but don't apply to LPs because of the corporate nature. Usually what people do is when they set up an LP, they set it up so you have an LLC as the general partner. So the general partner is unlimitedly liable. And then what you do is, but then since the LLC is the general partner, they're not liable because it's an LLC, so the next person up is not liable for that. So if you need to set up a situation where you can't use an LLC for some reason, that's the good idea to do. I think another area that you also run into is if you end up having a single member LLC, you can run into issues where it's treated as a sole proprietor for federal tax purposes. So you can run into issues with deducting pensions or this or that, or you can run into issues that you might not want all that on your personal return, your deductions and stuff like that. So most people usually use a limited liability company for this if it's 2-3 people, but the issues you can run into are if you have one person, you're treated as a sole proprietorship, and that comes into play with potential deductibility of certain business expenses. The other issue it comes into is with LLCs versus other entities is the self-employment tax. So a lot of people don't really, the point of the self-employment tax is, well actually, does anyone know anything about the self-employment tax? All right, does anyone? All right, self-employment taxes, so normally if you receive wages, you have your federal income tax taken out. And then you have your FICA amounts taken out. So you have the, I think it's 6.2%, and then the 2.9% for Medicare. So 6.2 is out for Social Security. So what happens in sole proprietorships and the partnerships is if you're doing an active business where it's a lot of your profits derive from your employment in the business rather than something that's passive, you end up running into the self-employment tax. Where this becomes a problem is not only, usually for the self-employment tax you have, it's taxed, the FICA is taxed, the employer pays half of it and then you pay half of it. So the issue that you run into is, with an LLC sometimes, is you don't only pay your half, but you also pay the half that the employer is supposed to pay. You can deduct certain amount of the half on your personal return, but you end up running into issues where if you use a different type of entity, then you can essentially avoid this self-employment tax. Namely, if you take a limited liability company and you can either opt to check the box for a C Corp or check the box to have an S Corp, where you still have that flow through, but you're not subject to the full amount of the self-employment tax. You'll still have, they'll make you pay what's called a reasonable a reasonable salary, and you'll have FICA applied towards that, but then you're not paying it on all income from the LLC. So, and then getting on to the next ones, you have the C Corp, which is the traditional. Generally what people use that for is, they use that for if you're going public or you're going to have a lot of owners. And then the same thing, and then the S Corp is not so much if you're going public, but a lot of people, that was the old LLC before they came out with LLCs, so some people are probably familiar with those. But those end up being restrictive on the types of owners that you run into. Namely, a couple of the biggest areas you run into is you need less than 25% passive income. So S corporations aren't the place if you want to start a real estate business. Probably not the place unless you're in an active trading and selling of real estate rather than the passive income. And then the other issue is the shareholder restriction on the other main, that you're a, namely individuals have to own the S corporation versus you can't have corporations own it, another partnership. And then actually one issue you run into a lot is, let's say a husband and wife come in and they say, we want to start an S corporation for ourselves. One thing you always have to ask, we're starting an S corporation and this other friend are starting. One thing you always have to ask is everyone a resident alien? Because that's another issue where S corporations, everyone has to be resident alien. So if you're a non-resident alien, then and you're going to be an owner, you end up running into issues where you're not allowed to be that. So I guess the questions would be, so we already did the LP and the LLC. When would you want to use, I guess, well actually we kind of already went over that, so I was going to say using an LLC. So you'd want to use an LLC versus an S if you're going to end up facing the self-employment tax, and then you're going to want to use maybe an LLC versus a C Corp. The main place where you're going to want to use the C Corp is if you're going public, because then you have the double layer of taxation. One just general rule for the double layer of taxation, I have the part on the top, which is about double taxation ends up costing roughly about 8 cents per dollar. While that doesn't come out to a lot, if you're making $10 million, that can be a problem. So actually, I can ask, what would be the advantages of using, why in some situations would you want to use double taxation, and some situations you not use double taxation with using the flow through? I guess that's also kind of answered. You have the one layer of tax. So what is the situation where flow through can run into some trouble and double taxation might be a good idea? Kind of. Does anyone have any? All right. One place you end up running into issues is one problem with flow through is if the partnership ends up earning $100 in income and it doesn't distribute any of it, or let's say that was plowed right back into the entity, you're personally liable for the tax of that. So you ended up not receiving, that's one issue, that's one reason why people might want a C Corp, is to not deal with the hassle, especially if they're growing. They might say, I want to, what ends up happening is the C Corp is taxed, or if you're doing the double taxation, you're taxed when you receive cash. So the C Corp is taxed at the entity level when it receives the cash. So you can't plow back more than you're going to plow back for that. And then you're only taxed when you receive a distribution. So you don't end up running the liquidity issues with that. So that's, there are certain situations. Oh.
I know it's slightly different, but real estate investment trusts,
yeah.
How are they taxed?
They are, I haven't done them in a while. I remember I did them in a couple classes. Generally, if you have to, there's restrictions on, I can answer in more detail later. But yeah, generally what it is they are usually not taxed, if I'm remembering correctly, But you have to give away, I think, 90% of your NOI to the shareholders, and there's other restrictions in there. I can go into more detail. I have it in notes and everything from other classes, from classes and everything. So there are restrictions where you have to have. There's the 90% rule, and then I guess real estate ownership, and meeting different requirements on that one. So the main issue with that one is that you can't retain the earnings and keep it in corporate resolution. But so that one saves you. REITs are another example. That's another type of entity that you can use if you're using real estate. But so generally, yeah. So there are different situations when different entities. So just to recap, LLC is good for if you have a small business, especially if it's passive investment. A C Corp is good for if you're going public, or if you just don't want to deal with the possibility that you're going to end up having tax liability when you didn't receive any distributions, although it can be saved by having provisions in an agreement, but not necessarily everyone makes an agreement to provide for distributions. You won't run into that liquidity issue. And then an S Corp is good in certain situations when, if you're that active business and you want to save that self-employment tax, but the downfall to C Corps and S Corps is you lose that flexibility of distributions between them. So when a client comes in, as my dad was saying, it isn't one of those things where I say, you're doing an LLC, you're doing this. It mainly comes down to an analysis of you take these factors, the tax limited liability, transferability, you ask them what they're desiring, and then you give them options. You have this one where you run into this type of tax, and then you run into that one where this type of tax, and you let them make the decision. Because if they make the decision, then they can't really come back and get you for making a decision for them, and then they realize it was the wrong decision. So just a kind of a pointer. I guess one of the major issues with picking an entity, and this is something that I'm assuming most people in here know, but a lot of your clients might not know, and a lot of clients don't really understand the difference of it. So is the piercing the corporate veil. So there's generally 2 or 3 theories. Underfunding and unfairness can kind of go in the same one. So unfairness is generally if someone created the entity to create a fraud, they did something where they knew they would have a high liability, they knew it was underfunded, and they knew that eventually they would get hit with this liability, and what they'll do is they'll close shop and open another place. So there's certain situations, or if it's taking advantage of certain people. But just the fact that certain people don't get their claims, that doesn't mean that's unfair. But if it has to be more excruciating circumstances for that to apply. The other one is underfunding. So if you have an entity where, let's say they're doing $10 million of business, but at all times you have $10,000 of equity in there, or $10,000 in the bank account because you're pulling the distributions out. This is a gross situation of it. You're probably not going to do it in that way. That situation, if you get sued, let's say you're doing $10 million worth of business and there's a suit against you for $2 million, and you only have $10,000 in there, and they see that you're pulling the funds out and keeping them in, they're going to probably pierce the veil and be able to go after your personal assets or the parent's personal assets. The third theory is the alter ego theory. So this is if they are running so much of an instrument that there's a unity of interest where they're almost the same entity. You have the same managers, you have the same owners, you have the same this, and there's not really too much of a separation. They work in the same building. The one's kind of it's not really its own entity, it's just an arm of the other one. Sometimes you can run into issues with that where they'll pierce it. But one good thing is, but one thing that we'll probably end up running into more so is piercing doesn't happen unless there haven't been any cases of piercing, I believe, in most states with more than 10 owners, but most of the time we're dealing with less than 10 owners. So there's just certain things that you can do, considering we're mostly dealing with those privately held companies. There's no piercing and publicly held. So there's certain formalities that you can follow. One big thing is keep with the formalities. So I don't know if anyone, there's different things such as keep separate bank accounts. Don't use your bank as don't use your LLC as a piggy bank. Oh, my son has a fee to pay for Little League. Let me just write it out of the corporate, don't do that. The other one is treat it as a third party. Treat as if you're dealing with another person and you have an arm's length transaction. One thing a lot of clients run into is when you're signing, don't sign it as John Doe. Make sure you sign as such and such corporation, signed by John Doe as manager or as member. A couple of the other, you run into issues with people that don't keep corporate books, so stress to your clients that you should be keeping books, holding meetings, having annual meetings, or have minutes in annual meetings, adequately funded so you don't end up becoming underfunded. And then actually one of the biggest ones is the use of the corporate moniker. I've had this question a number of times. How much do I have to put the name, the LLC or the corporation or this next to the logo? If you are not putting that on a lot of your signage and everything, then you're not putting yourself out to the public that you're a limited liability company or that you have limited liability. So what ends up happening is then they say, well, if you're not putting yourself as having limited liability, they're going to come after you as limited liability. So they're going to end up, that's one thing that's actually recommend to your clients to use the moniker as much as possible. Usually these formalities, what we do is we don't just tell them off the cuff to do this or do that. Usually where we use them is we actually have a letter that we send out that says follow these formalities. You can run into issues where the corporate veil can be pierced and they can go after your personal assets. So we have actually a letter that we send out to our clients that say treat bank accounts separate, sign your name as manager, and these types of things, treat it as a third party, or else you're going to end up regretting it eventually if you end up having a huge tort against you. And yeah, and also another thing on limited liability, usually, as everyone probably knows, they're going to make you waive out of that. If you have a limited liability going with the loans, you're going to have to guarantee anyway. So the main thing that limited liability is for is against tort actions. So if someone slips and falls in your property, you have a huge thing, a huge claim against you. That's the main situation that's going to be for. The next thing is for the S election. Before we were talking about why you might make the S election, so this is how you would make the S election. So generally for this, the default, if you create a C Corp, the default is a C treatment, which is the double taxation. And if you do an LLC, the default is partnership taxation. So with either the next slide is actually the LLC treatment. So to make an S election, you have to follow 2553. But to have that, you have to meet the stringent requirements. This is something, so if someone wants to come in and do an S corporation, they have to meet these requirements of the 100 shareholders, 100 shareholders or less, husband and wife or spouses or partners or whatever, depends on the state. If that's a whole new topic that's coming up with now with DOMA and everything. Generally that's counted as one person, so technically you could have 200 people if you have partners together. You have to have one class of stock. You can't have class A where they have voting rights and then the other person has non-voting rights but they receive dividends. Only individuals can own it, and estates can own it in certain situations, and certain trusts can own it. One of those situations is after death, within 2 years after death, and then there's the certain two types of qualified trust, which kind of probably wouldn't be worth getting into because most people don't use them. But if you do need them, one is restrictive as you can only have one person in the trust, and then the next one is you end up running into penalties and that type of stuff. The other issue is the non-resident alien. So first thing you have to ask is, are all the potential owners resident aliens? That's one place you can end up setting up an S-corp and then all of a sudden it's terminated and it's not getting treated the way you wanted it to be treated. And then mainly the timing requirement. So a lot of people are, it's not like anything else where you can just make the election at any time. You have to make it either during the preceding year or the first 2.5 months of the current year. So for instance, if you're a calendar year, for 2013, I can only make an election for next year right now because we're past March 15th. So I can make an election for 2014, or if we were before March 15th, then I could have made an election for 2013. And then another actually important thing is it's important to check your state's requirements. So for instance, some states require that some states, if you elect federally as an S-corp, you're automatically an S-corp for state purposes, whereas other states, Pennsylvania, they make you register for, they make you send in an extra form on that. And if you didn't send in that form, you're treated differently. There's actually one of the jokes that took a couple state law class, and one of the jokes is that most states follow the revenue rule, which is whatever gets more revenue for the state. So, it's just so there's situations most states are looking for ways to edge out extra taxes on that. So if they can get another level of tax, get you at this one and then get you at dividends, that's one thing you have to watch out is the state filings. So as I said, you can make an election with LLCs. A lot of people go, why would I even do that? Why wouldn't I just set up a C Corp, or why wouldn't I set up an S Corp? You end up getting the flexibility. Well, if you're running a C Corp and an S Corp, you don't get the full flexibility, but you get the option that you can go back to an LLC, and it makes it easier to go back to that. But the main difference is you add in the 8832, which allows you to elect for a C Corp, or you put them together. It's the change in status. So again, the considerations that you can use are the one-member LLC is one issue that you run into. That's treated as a sole proprietorship, whereas if you elect as an S or if you elect as a C Corp, then you're not treated as a sole proprietor, and then there's different deductions that you can make that you wouldn't have been able to take. The self-employment tax is that one, which I mentioned, and then the other consideration is, would you want to deal with if you can't become an S Corp, do you want to deal with the second layer of tax, or are you willing to pay an extra 8 cents per dollar on the income that you're receiving? So the next thing after choosing, does anyone have any questions on that? Or that's usually a topic that most people know pretty well, have been kind of beaten in everyone's head. So I guess the next topic is this. I did it mainly for LLCs and LPs because it's a little more. There's more topics that you can do, but the operating agreement, and there's certain terms that you want to have in there when you're doing this. So first one is the capital contributions. What you want with the capital contributions, where you can run into issues with this is, let's say you have 4 partners. They're all working together. 3 partners are putting in $500,000, and the third partner is a deadbeat, doesn't want to put anything in. What are you going to do to make sure they put in the capital contribution? What are the penalties going to be if they don't do the capital contribution? So it's an important thing to put in there that someone has to match it, and if they don't match the other people's contributions or an agreed upon contribution, then their interest drops. You just have to, it's good to put stuff in there or put some sort of penalty clause if they don't do that, because you don't want, the less bad situation is all of a sudden the company does well and this person's riding the other 3 people's waves. Or the worst situation is the company doesn't do well. These 3 people are out of 1.5 million, and this other person's getting away scot-free. He's like, well, I got my chance. See you guys later. So you run into issues with that. Obviously, we want to put the members and partners in the partnership agreement. That's pretty standard. Have their addresses and whatnot. So addresses, you can put phone numbers, contact information. So it's in one place. If someone moves, if you end up changing attorneys or something happens, everything is all in one place. The next thing you want to put in there is the management provisions. This is where, well, for an LP, it's important because you have to know who the general partner is. The manager is the general partner. The LP, the limited partners, cannot have an active role in the company, and they'll end up having a passive. They can only have a passive role. So you have to set forth who the general manager is, or who the general partner is, who the limited partner is. The other thing is you want to set forth for an LLC is who the manager is. If you have 2 or 3 managers, you might have something in there, the supermajority provisions, where let's say you have 50-50, that if you want both managers to be able to, the client has to know whether they want both managers to be able to sign. They have to sign together. Whether one manager can bind the bind the LLC on their own. Whether if you have 3 managers, do you need 2 of the 3 versus just, it gets once you get into 4 or 5. Once you have 4 managers, do you need 4 or 5 managers? Do you need just a simple majority, or do you want a certain member to have a majority, to have essentially a veto right by having a supermajority vote, where you have, let's say someone has a 20% interest, you need 81% interest just to, because then you need that last person's 21% interest. The next thing you run into is the allocations. This is the good thing about the LLCs and the LPs, is, as I said before, where you have John and Ed, you can allocate it so John can recoup his capital at first, and then after he receives his capital, then Ed receives a lot more money back, and he ends up getting his funds back on that one. The other thing, you can allocate depreciation, recourse and non-recourse debt, and then different distributions and whatnot. The one issue you run into this is you have to have, if you do an allocation that is outside of the proportional interest, it has to have substantial economic effect. I could go a couple days for that, but generally, just kind of in a nutshell, it means you can't do any tax games, where, like an example would be, let's say you have two shareholders or 2 partners. One is a foreign entity and doesn't get taxed in the United States, and one is a United States entity. And let's say there's a tax treaty where people from that country don't get taxed. So a game that you can play is all the income gets allocated to the foreign company. They're not paying taxes on that, and then depreciation or something to the other extent gets allocated to the other person. So you end up creating money out of the depreciation, and then you end up overall reducing the tax, but both parties are actually better off. That's generally, you can't do any tax games on that one. Another situation is if someone's tax exempt in one year, then allocating income to them that year, and then allocating all the income to the other person in the next year, you end up paying no tax the first year because the first person is tax exempt, and then the second year the person's paying the tax that everyone would have been paying anyway, but the people aren't better off. They're better off, and there's lower tax liability. So generally it gets rid of the tax games. The next thing you want to put in is there's the buy-sell agreements, which I'm actually getting on next. And then another important thing is the governing law and the arbitration. You just want to choose a state where you have your attorneys, or something that's favorable to you, to your corporation. And arbitration, you've probably heard enough conversation about sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. The one main thing you get out of it is sometimes it's quicker, and the other big thing it can be helpful for is if you have something that's very technical, a judge might not fully understand it and appreciate it. Whereas if it's something like, let's say, nuclear physics or something, it's something like that, you can hire someone that has an expertise in that and fully understands the industry norm and can get their head behind and they're in the case. So arbitration is a good thing to have in there rather than just letting it go to court, run up fees, and letting it take longer. So now I guess buy-sell agreements are, this is one of the more important parts that you have in an operating agreement. It's what's called the prenup of businesses. It's one of those things, you know, when you're in the honeymoon stage, you're sitting there going, oh, I don't need one, but the funny thing is actually, unlike regular life, with partnership, with businesses and such, sometimes things don't work out, not because you're fighting or there's a conflict. Sometimes just there's life events that end up happening. So it's good to have these and lay these out in the beginning to make sure everyone gets their fair share rather than running into the huge dispute in the future. So there's generally 4 situations, I call them the 4 Ds of life that kind of affect businesses. There's divestment, disability, divorce, and death. So when all these things happen to a partner. So divestment, it's just an overarching term for, it could be the person wants to retire, or it could be they're just sick of the business. They could be a bank that helped provide funding and they're in the or an entrepreneur that's in the business of making startups. So you want to plan and have that as a triggering event. So if someone wants to get out, there's different ways you can do that through the put call option, as was discussed earlier, which means that someone can put their shares on you, so they can force you to buy their shares, or they can call you out and take all your shares for a certain price. Or there's certain for instance, you have retirement events. What is someone going to get if they decide to retire? And make sure that they get their fair share. The second D is disability. This is another event that, again, it's not a fight between everyone. If you have someone that was working 60, 80 hours a week and all of a sudden he's only working 20, the business is going to suffer. So what people might do is, number one, to keep the business going is they have buyout provisions. You'll end up having disability insurance, either lump sum or payments, and you can provide either a disability benefit that pays for buying that disabled member out, or you, and then the other thing you might do is, because it wasn't something that they did, you might even have a premium that you give them an extra amount kind of as a, just to help them out because it wasn't their fault or something happened on that end. The third one is a big one, especially in today's society, is divorce. That one, you end up running into issues where you don't have a problem with your partner, your partner has a problem with their partner. So with this one, there's a number of things that you can do to try to protect the business from divorce. Because a lot of times and in most states, a business is deemed a marital asset, so they can grab, if there's a divorce, they can grab 50% of either the equity of it or grab the business. Usually you can't grab the business itself in certain situations. But so you want to protect yourself so you don't end up basically with an unwanted partner, which is your partner's ex-partner. So the couple ways of doing that is, one is it's called a consent enjoinder, where you have the spouse write off that they're not going to include this, they don't want this included in the marital estate. They lose all death rights to receive any amounts of the elective share at death, which is usually, it can be a third of the estate. It depends on the state's laws. It can be 50%, can be a substantial amount. So the one is a consent enjoinder, which completely writes off that They don't want any interest in this. The second situation you can do is you can have transferability where if the stock ends up in the wrong hands, then you can purchase it back, so then you don't end up with an unwanted partner. And then actually the third one, which we do a lot, is using discounts. So you have the lack of marketability discount, the lack of control discount, and the lack of transferability discount, which I discussed in the next slide. You use them, so you can purchase, let's say partner C is getting divorced, you can purchase partner C's shares at 50% of the value, and all of a sudden you lower the marital estate, so he's happy. The partners are happy because they received the shares at a discount, and then potentially the partner can go back a couple years later and buy the shares back at 50% or something to that effect. But it's a way to protect yourself against having an ex-spouse take all the funds. So, and then the last one is death, which is pretty clear. It's have life insurance. Usually you can either have a mandatory buyout. With this one, you just don't want to end up having an unwanted heir being all of a sudden being your new shareholder, or your new partner, or becomes the controlling shareholder. That would be even better. So, death, you have to figure these out. The other couple things. Oh.
You put something in the agreement that prevents a member from dying, that makes it illegal.
If you find something that's effective, you could put that in there. But if you find something that's effective, I think all of us would want to know. Kind of a Mormon. Yeah, it's one of those. Yeah, if you could do that, that would help. Well, I guess to an extent.
I wasn't being serious.
But actually, well, technically you could do with a living will. That's in the estate planning side. You can say that I want to be held if tax consequences or something. Not necessarily the most kosher thing you want to do, but you can do stuff like that.
A company never dies if the company is the shareholder.
Yeah. So you can run into issues on that one. So the other couple things, the lifetime buyout. So if a third party sale, bona fide purchase, you don't want someone that you don't know as I've said a couple times, you don't want someone that you don't know as your shareholder. If you pledge interest for a loan, you don't want a bank to be your shareholder in the future. If someone's judicially declared incompetent or bankrupt, probably don't want to end up running into issues with that where you have a bunch of creditors. You have to make the charging payments to creditors. And then another event would be the shotgun clause, which was discussed earlier, which is, I don't like you, here's, I'm offering $1 million for, I'm going to buy your shares out at $1 million. They either have to accept it or release it. If they don't accept it, then they can buy your shares at that one. So that's a way, if you have someone that's all of a sudden an alcoholic or someone that has drug issues, they just haven't been productive or some other reason, you can even...
But if the person's an employee, and you're not allowed to, as an employee as well as a shareholder, you can't even discuss that.
No.
You have legal ramifications saying you're drinking.
Well, not
that, I can't fire you, but I could buy you out.
It's more for an owner. If you're, I'll give an example.
Ed's doing all the sweat equity. I can't fire him for that. I'd get sued.
Yeah, we had some. Well, it depends on the state rules.
Sure.
It depends on the state because there's the off-duty.
Protected disability.
Well, yeah, it depends on the state.
Alcoholism is a protected disability.
First of all, you can't ask about it. You can't fire.
Stumbling drunk. Well, you don't have to ask.
We actually just.
You can't.
We actually just had that
with
with.
Disability.
We actually had that where we had its brothers, and they were asking what happens if someone ends up, we want to get rid of them, and that's a situation you might want to. If their owner, if you can still, I guess you can still buy their shares out, and then you can and then pursuant to that, you can make it that they have to resign from everything. So pursuant to the buy-sell agreement, you can make it that if you sell your shares, you resign as an employee. It's one of those things, if you're brothers or something, or your partners, you probably know what's going on. So it's not like you're even asking, it's, what's happening, or if you have enough, you don't have enough evidence, usually if it's partners, for that one. So it's a good way. You could even go, I want to get rid of you because you're wearing black shoes. Something as dumb as that. It's, that actually goes to the employment stuff, and then you run into, I discuss that later, is the, you run into issues with that if you have a public policy issue. You can't fire them for that. So the last thing in the buy-sell agreement is, which is important or a triggering event, is permitted transferees. So this is one thing that's important, especially if you have kids that might end up taking the business over. One of the companies that we've dealt with, two partners will fight because they don't want the son to end up taking over. So you can negotiate to have a permitted transferee, which means this is someone, if you transfer it to them, then it's transferred outside of the agreement. And what ends up happening is you don't trigger all these buyouts and all this other third party because they're permitted. And another thing you can do on that, which a lot of people do, is the person, let's say it's a child or a relative, they have to have been working for the company for 5 years, they have to be 30 or 35, they have to have been in a management position. You could even put in stuff in there, I don't know, I guess they don't, same thing kind of on that one, you can't ask, but if it's your kid, you kind of know if they have drug habits or something like that. You can put in just different restrictions on that. So that's, permitted transferees are important for the succession planning on that end.
You can make them a permitted transferee, but give them no control or voting rights in the business.
Well, it depends on the interest that you end up giving, and then you end up, if you retain the voting rights, then you end up actually you could potentially run into 2036 issues for estate planning. 2036 issues are if you retain, if you give stock and you retain the voting rights to an extent, it's a particular situation, then it's deemed as if you're still owning everything. So if you're gifting it to your kids and you still maintain the voting rights, it can, in certain situations, it can be deemed as if you didn't give the gift and then it gets brought back in your estate with all the appreciation in the future. So you run into issues on that one. So it's, you can control this by, you could potentially have it that if so-and-so is here, then it's managed by X, or you can put different provisions like that in there. Right. It's kind of, but the person that transferred it, they can't have this control, or else then you start running into the 20. That's like the issue with if you gift your house and then still live in your house, you're using your house, and you end up you run into, that's going to get pulled back in your estate. So the next part is I guess the forms of buyouts. There's you can have optional versus mandatory. A lot of times optional is a lot better because optional allows you the option to buy it, whereas mandatory, you're required to buy it. For death, a lot of times you use mandatory because there's life insurance involved, so the money's there, you might as well let them. But for the lifetime buyouts and the other, like for instance for divestment, you might want to have an option because you might either not have the cash to pay for it or the future cash to pay for it, or you might just think the business is not as good as you thought, and you might think the value that's required is overvalued. The next is you can actually structure the buyouts in two different ways. One is an entity redemption versus a cross purchase. So entity redemption is that the entity purchases the stock, or let's use stock, it's the easiest way to. So let's say you have 100 shares out, you have 4 shareholders, each has 25 shares. So for entity redemption, the shareholder ends up, actually use 300. You'll see why. So what ends up happening is the entity ends up purchasing 75% of the shares from the one person, and out of there's 225 shares left. So out of the 225 shares, everyone owns 75. Each person has a third interest in it. So your interest goes up by that. A cross purchase on the other end, each of the other 3 shareholders will purchase 25. That's why I multiplied it by 3. Each of the 3 shareholders will purchase 25 of this person's shareholder. So you have to have three different, well, it could be a part of the same agreement, but you end up having three different purchases. When you have a couple shareholders, that's not a big issue, but when you have 10 shareholders or 15 shareholders, that can be, it looks like the Declaration of Independence with signatures on the bottom and witnesses and all that fun stuff in there. And the other issue that runs into is with death time buyouts, because if you have insurance, sometimes it's better for the company to buy it out, because then you only have one insurance policy per member. Whereas if you have the death time buyout, if you have the cross purchase, so let's say the 5 of us are in an entity, I have insurance on the 4 of you guys, you have insurance on the 4 of us, you have insurance on the 4 of us, you get where I'm going on that one. So it ends up being a headache. But the benefit of a cross purchase, if you have less people, is you end up getting, I don't know how many people are familiar with the concept of outside basis and inside basis. If you are, you increase your outside basis. If you don't know what that means, just it's a tax benefit for when you sell the shares in the future. So that you can do one of that one, or you can do the wait and see method, which is kind of know that this is an event and figure it out when you're. That's what a lot of people do anyway. But it's better to have the plan in place. But all right, so the valuation, we kind of touched that earlier with the shotgun. There's multiple ways you can do valuations. A lot of it derives from where the value is derived from in the business. So for instance, if the value is, let's say they're gold investors, the value in the business is the actual value of the gold. Or let's say they're real estate investors and they're speculating, they're working on appreciation. The value of the business is the actual value of the house. For that, you might use market comparables, which would be this many story houses, what's the user regression for this many story houses, this many bathrooms, this many being this close to the central business district, blah, blah, blah. Or you might use, for gold, you can use market values. Gold's a readily tradable commodity. Or if it's stock, use the NASDAQ or whatever the trading market is for that one. The other thing you can do is, like, we had a coffee company and we were trying to figure out which we use as a value. That one, they probably have maybe $15,000 of equipment. So if you value it on the value of the equipment, not going to be the most accurate value for the company. Whereas it might end up having 30, 40, 50,000 in sales a year, capitalize that using a 10% interest rate, let's say 40,000, it's $400,000. So you do the 40 divided by 0.10. I decided to get an annuity. So you end up, for that situation, you might want to use discounted cash flow. If they have stable cash flows, what you do is you project the future cash flows, and if it's stable, you can work that. If they're not so stable, you can use multiples. So you can take cash, let's say sales or EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax and depreciation. Everyone always messes that up. You can take that and multiply it by 4 or multiply it by 3, or you can take comparables and find out what other companies that are like that, find out what multiple they use. So like REITs, they'll do that a lot. You take the NOI, an NOI multiple, and you find out what the general NOI multiple is for someone that invests in industrial properties and does something like that. Let's say it's 9. Then you take that NOI, multiply it by 9, that's your value. And then there's always the simple method, which is just picking a fixed value, which is everyone agrees every year, every 2 years. I'm going to pick, this company's going to be worth $2 million. You have to have something that's reasonable, and if it ends up becoming something that's stale, it's a stale valuation. You can have a term in there. If the value, this fixed value, hasn't been updated in the last couple years, you can have a new appraiser come in, or you have to come up with a new fixed value. That can be an issue, especially with say you have a sometimes you run into situations where it's a 25-year-old fixed value. It's going to be a problem when you try to sell, especially with inflation and the way the dollar's moving right now. So you run into those issues. The other thing is with the fixed value, it has to be something that the IRS will buy. So you could say a fixed value of $1 and then say the gifting it to someone, I sold it to them for $1, IRS is not going to buy that and they're going to treat it as a gift. Let's say it's worth $2 million or $1 million, they're going to treat it as basically $1 million gift. So you have to use a value that would be, that's reasonable. You can't use $1 million for something that's $10 million on that one. And then the other thing you can use, well, this is the situation where you can kind of do that is with discounts, as I discussed earlier. The minority discount, which is, the minority discount is that when you buy an asset, you're not only buying the asset, you're buying also control of the asset. Like imagine if you bought a car and all right, yeah, you bought this car, you have rights to this car, but you can't drive it because there's someone else that controls when you can drive it and everything. You probably wouldn't want to pay full, let's say even 50% or 49%, you don't want to pay 49% of the car that you can't drive. So you can get a discount from that. There's lack of marketability, which is the fact that your shares are outside of the, it's not in a market. You can't go on NASDAQ and just say, here, someone buy it. It's not something that, you have to find people that want to work with, if you're working with your brothers or your sisters, you have to find someone that's crazy enough to want to work with your brothers and sisters, or if you have like a certain family dynamic, someone that's gonna, if it's 4 brothers and one person comes in, they know they're gonna get pushed out, so they're not gonna want to push, they're gonna wonder, the brothers are gonna be looking after each other, not looking after the other person, so you end up getting a discount there. And then the buy-sell agreement itself actually works here too, because the transfer restrictions work to get another discount, and you can get anywhere from 15 to up to 50%. So I don't think people usually go more, people try, but you can get high discounts on that, and you can use the business for succession planning. So let's say my business is, let's use the 50%. My business is $20 million. So you can use 2 spouses, you have a $10 million exemption, 50% discount. All of a sudden, my $20 million business transfers under the unified credit. And they avoid, whereas if it wasn't transferred with the discount, you'd be paying, let's just use 50% for simplicity for the tax rate, although it's 45%. You'd be paying $5 million in gift taxes if you did it the other way without a discount. So that's another place where you'll run into IRS scrutiny on this. You have to have a part of your valuations, it has to be, you have to have justification why these minority discounts are in there. And if you don't have the proper justification, then it doesn't start, that's actually a whole tangential issue with gift tax returns, where you want to make sure that your accountant, if you have someone do it, make sure the accountant does the proper justification, or else it doesn't start the statute of limitation tolling. This is probably going over some people. The statute of limitation tolling for that this value is the proper value, because after 3 years, IRS can't challenge that. So that probably went over some people's heads, but it's one of those things a lot of times with this stuff is the more times you hear it, eventually it starts making sense. So everyone kind of has that. And then the last thing is there's different ways of doing this. You can have bought out cash, insurance proceeds. You can have promissory notes, installment sales. Some of the other more creative ones is percent of future earnings. So you don't pay right up now. It depends on, so if you ended up creating a company where you pumped up the earnings this year so you get a high number, this is a way to protect someone that you're receiving, the people that purchase it are receiving a fair value. Another more creative one is using promising future employment, or future employment as a manager, or promising future employment as a consultant. So it allows them the extra funds without having it as cash, which sometimes can end up actually being worse for tax reasons, because then you're converting capital gains potentially to ordinary income, but it's just it's a bargaining chip that you can use against people or with people. whatnot. So speaking of that, the employment thing, there is employment. There are different types of employment. This when you're hiring your employees and looking for everything. Generally, every state but Montana, yay, has at-will employment. So if anyone has a client that's going to have a employee in Montana, you're going to have for cause. What at-will means is I can terminate you pretty much for whatever I want, as long as it doesn't violate a law, as long as it doesn't violate public policy. So for instance, if someone makes a sexual harassment claim, if I fire them all of a sudden, that's against public policy. If someone was doing jury duty and fired for doing jury duty, against public policy. There's certain situations like that. So, but the thing with at will is I can go, again, I can say, I don't like that you always wear blue shirts. I don't like that you have 2 tattoos here. Unless it's gender specific, you run into issues with that one. So at will, it's probably, you want to make sure that your employees are at will, unless it's usually higher level employees are the next two, which is either term or for cause. So term is pretty simple, term. You're an employee for term, and you can only be fired within that term if it's for cause. For cause, what that is, there has to be justification for firing you. So you can't just go, I don't know, I don't like you because you drink water bottles with green things on the outside. It's something that's completely arbitrary, but you can fire someone if they're embezzling money from the company, or you can fire someone if you have a handbook that says, I'm expecting you to produce 100 widgets a day, and you're only producing 10 widgets a day. It's something where you're not performing. The last one you can run into is
Montana have?
Montana has a for-cause default.
Meaning,
so
you need cause before you can fire an employee?
Yes, it was a 2005 or 2006 case where they got rid of at will. Or I think, actually no, I think it was legislation. So it's the only state, I believe, unless I don't think anything has changed, that's the only state that has for cause. So don't hire employees, don't hire employees, then you run into, that's another whole issue. That can run into state, especially if you're a government entity, you can run into what's the clause? I don't know.
Don't terminate anybody without a good reason.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Well, yeah, that's kind of a general rule. And then the last one you can use is, this is why I put employment in quotations, is independent contractor. So, good thing about independent contractor is, if you fire them, no unemployment tax or no unemployment benefits. They're not required to receive pensions and this and that, all the things that employers or employees are required. However, you have to give them enough control over what they can do, over how they're doing it, or else they can still be deemed employees. So I think there was a Microsoft case where there were a bunch of independent contractors for a pension fund where they were deemed employees, and then the plan ended up running into issues because now all of a sudden you have these people that they were independent contractors and not treated well, or not under the plan before. All of a sudden now they're under the plan, and you run into the non-discrimination issues, and it gets highly that's another whole issue. So all right. Moving past that, you end up having your different the things that you can do. Negotiator duties, do you want it specific or general? If you go too specific, you run into issues where, they're doing everything you say, but they miss the spirit of the job. It's like or you missed something, and then they say, well, you didn't tell me to do that. Or if you end up having a laundry list of things to do, you just confuse them because they're reading a laundry list and they can't keep track of that. Whereas a general description is kind of more of that. Location of the duties, this is more important nowadays with information technology. I know a lot of people work home. Are they working at home? So location, maybe you can set it up so they have to be in the office 3 days a week, out of the office 2 days a week. Can they be doing this? Do they have to be in the office all the time? What times are they expected to be in the office? Can they do this in Europe while here? Where do they have to be? Compensation, you have salary versus bonuses. Salary, usually allows for more cohesion between the group because they're not competing against each other. Whereas if you run into bonuses or commissions, because you're working, well, sometimes it can work for you if it's based on a group metric. But if it, for instance, with commissions, then you run into Enron problems where everyone's trying to edge everyone out, and you end up having people start fudging numbers, and you run into some fun stuff with that one. And then, you know, all Enron goes and all that fun stuff, and created all the new accounting rules that everyone, if there's the CPAs in the room, probably know of way too much. There's the fringe benefits. You can negotiate those. There's pretty, I won't get into those. Business expense reimbursement, be clear, receipts. Everyone needs receipts. If you end up paying them and there are no receipts or no justification for it, IRS might just say, you're just paying them more compensation. You get, the employer still gets the deduction, but if they go, also you have to be clear, what expenses am I reimbursing you for? Am I reimbursing you to go to dinner when you're on vacation, or am I just reimbursing you for the hotel? Am I reimbursing you to buy a souvenir for your daughter, or am I well, that's not a, you shouldn't be reimbursing for that anyway. But there's such, you get what I'm saying. Make sure you have receipts, make sure you have, and define that out. The other thing is restrictive covenants. That's actually another slide. And dispute resolution, we've kind of already discussed that, how it can be easier. And make sure you go in a state that, and you can decide what law you, well, it doesn't always work, but you can try to decide what laws governs. Probably not Montana. No offense to anyone from Montana. Heard it's a beautiful state. But, one of the things that's actually important, this goes to what you were saying earlier about the kind of the drinking and everything. So the employee handbook, you can say what types of conduct are allowed, what types of conduct aren't allowed. You want to keep it a professional. If you want to keep it professional, keep it professional. If you want to have it a little more relaxed, like Google, you can have it more relaxed. It depends on, you can set this up in your thing. One important thing on this one is be explicit, bold, cap, make them sign underneath it. This does not make a for-cause contract. This is just, it's still at will. I'm just putting you on notice on what you need to do. So a couple other things that you need to do on this, or that are important on this is, as I said before, non-discrimination. So set up a non-discrimination policy and a sexual harassment policy. So if someone is getting harassed one way or the other, or someone's getting discriminated against one way or the other, they can have someone to go to. They have a method of dealing with it. And not only that, but don't just have like a procedure set in place and then someone calls and, okay, it's not going to work too well. So have it and actually follow through with it too. But that's a good thing. The other thing that actually more recently is a social media policy, because you have to worry about your employees coming and blogging such and such is, I don't know, doing something to defaming other employees, defaming the employer. You should say, also the other thing is, do you want your employees sitting there on Facebook the whole time, or do you want them on Twitter, do you want them on this? You should say, if it's our equipment, we don't want you doing anything with our equipment. Issues you run into this is with the National Labor Relations Board. There's concerted, if you are too restrictive, it's you can't restrict what's called concerted action, which is action that would create a union, or actions that we're just talking about wages, terms of employment. Such and such is so mean. Such and such has, they have me working extra hours and they didn't pay me. You can't restrict that type of blog, but you can restrict something that says, what's his name is the devil, or something that's a little more, more defamatory. The other issue you run into here is a lot of states have off-duty protection, and that's where I guess, I don't know if the drinking might be a New York thing. Never mind. So for instance, just different states have different things. So the example here is New York and California have more broader prohibitions for firing people for off-duty actions. If it doesn't, obviously, if you're committing crimes, that's another story. But other states like New Jersey have prohibitions for firing someone for smoking, whereas another thing Pennsylvania says, no, we don't have any prohibitions for firing someone for off. So One example might be some states might protect someone that's gambling. It depends on the state. There's 50 states, so 50 rules. I don't have all the rules, but this is just to show you the breadth of the types of rules that you run into. Now that you have the employees, you have to motivate them to work. So with this one, you can use different types of motivation with that, and this is all stuff that the client's probably going to end up knowing, and they're probably going to have to get into and make the decision. This is more on the business. This is more of my business side talking. You have the different types of centers. You have the cost center, you have a sales center, you have a profit center. Cost centers are focused on reducing costs. Sales centers, increasing revenue. Not necessarily the best thing, because the easiest way to reduce costs is not going out of business, and you have zero costs. Or sales, you can start selling stuff at losses, and all of a sudden, your profit's going out. Oh, all right. So you have this. Yeah. So there's different ways, and then you can also have for qualitative centered businesses. So quality of the business, customer satisfaction. You make sure that people know they can do that. You can pay them in. Actually, it's because in a matter of time. One thing that's very important is the restricted awards. So Section 83B. What this is when you receive stock that vests over time. You have to, within 30 days, you can make an election to recognize all that stock in the first year when the stock is only worth pennies. Whereas if you receive it in the future, the value of the stock could go up from a penny a share to $100 a share, and you're going to have to recognize all that income. And then not only that, but you end up, by recognizing it now, it starts the tolling, it starts the timing for the long-term capital gain treatment. So then any future gains gets 20% treatment as opposed to ordinary income treatment because it's short-term capital gain. You can also do non-qualified deferred compensation, which can end up being golden handcuffs and to keep people there longer. And then there's just the stuff on using confidentiality agreements and restrictive covenants. Restrictive covenants have to be reasonable within scope, duration, and geographic area. If not, courts will just blue pencil it, and if you say the whole state, the whole country, and it only justifies a smaller area, they'll blue pencil it and say a smaller area. So I guess that is the end of it.
We have two questions when you can answer.
Yeah.
Someone from online, a couple of people from online asked for director's responsibility on 501c3 companies. My opinion, it's no different than any other director. You own a fiduciary duty, you manage the company. If you know there's wrongdoing, or you should know there's wrongdoing, you could be personally liable. If you're serving on a 501c3, make sure you have director's insurance.
They also run into liability if for political, if the 501c3 does extra political action. There's a number of different things they can do where they get penalized X percent, and then if it isn't penalized, and if it isn't fixed again, they can get penalized another 50 or 100%. There's various things like political activity, aiding in an election, a candidate in an election. So there's that, and then you also have private inurement, where if you allow someone to get a private benefit instead of a public benefit, that's another situation where you can actually run into issues with 501c3s. And the director, if they make the decision and they know about it, you can protect yourself by using legal counsel or someone but it has to be reasonable, but you can run into issues with that.
And someone wanted to know on NOLs, carrybacks and carry forwards.
For the, I guess it's you can carry it back.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the NOLs, you can carry it back a
couple years and then carry forward.
You can carry it forward a number of years.
You may want to say what NOL is.
Yeah, NOL is a non-operating loss, or no, not non-operating loss. Net operating loss, yes. It's one of those after 3 hours things. So it's net operating loss. So if the company has an operating loss, you can bring it back, I believe it's 2 years, to offset past income or you can bring it forward. I believe it's 20 years and then after 20 years it goes bye-bye. So you can use that. So if you have a net operating, if you had $1 million 1 year back of income, your net operating loss of $1 million, all of a sudden that $1 million the year before gets reversed, and you end up having zero income. You end up getting the taxes you paid back.
And if case the question,
what's that?
You file an amended tax return?
Yeah.
in case the question, I'm not sure, but there are certain prohibitions about buying a company with an NOL loss. It was abused many years ago. Okay, the course is done. Anyone who's here, if you want to give us your business card, you'll be on our monthly newsletter. Anyone on the web, just go to our website. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.